Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue our discussion of the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year, 2020. And today, I'd like to focus our attention on the title that received spine number 1025. This is a film from 2014 from the filmmaker Wes Anderson. And the name of the film is The Grand Budapest Hotel. So this is the 2014 film from the brilliant artist Wes Anderson, starring Ralph Fiennes and Tony Revolori in a pair of performances, a combination of performances, a duo, if you will, that really leads the way throughout this film in terms of its anchor and its emotional weight. It is a very brilliantly typical example of the cinematic heights, the artistic heights of Wes Anderson's filmography. This is, on the one hand, a very Wes Anderson type of film in terms of its look, in terms of its panache, in terms of the fine attention given to detail, both in terms of the decor and the costuming and the color palette, but also in terms of the emotional currents, if you will, that run through each of the characters that he portrays so lovingly and so much with a great sense of earnestness and gusto in that wonderfully charming fashion that is evocative of so many different strands of cinema, both old and new. So this is the film from Wes Anderson, The Grand Budapest Hotel. And what I particularly admire about this film and Wes Anderson's touch here is that he gives us a story that feels like it is timeless. It feels like it's a storybook. It feels, in that sense, very much of a fantasy, because we are dealing with a fiction or a world that is created out of whole cinematic cloth, if you will. So these are worlds that are cinematic and that don't necessarily exist in reality on the one hand, and yet we always understand that his world is very palpable. It is filled with many intricate details that we sense, that we can feel and touch and experience with our senses. And that thus gives the film, in a very interesting, intriguing way, links to reality in terms not only of the intricacies of the world that is being created by the brilliant mind of Wes Anderson, but also the echoes that we see translated from the real-life antecedents that the film structure and the film story is based upon. Perhaps most strikingly and most directly, the notion of Europe and the European way of living and how it was affected from the time in between the wars, specifically the 1930s, and then how time and events that we assume occurred that are parallel to real-life events, how they affect a certain place and certain people through to the 1960s, and then all the way up to the 1980s and then present day. So there is a real sense of not just a cinematic nostalgia, but also a sense of history and time that is affecting the proceedings. And so in one sense, this feels like a fantasy. This feels like a beautiful cinematic concoction that is wonderfully constructed to very loving, intricate detail And yet, on the other hand, we do get a sense of the emotional weight of the characters and a kind of sense of being tied to or echoing something in reality. And in that sense, this film holds something that's very special. This is something, of course, that we also see in many of Wes Anderson's works. In fact, all of his works, I would suggest, have that same sense of the fantasy and the real in a wonderful concoction and blend that Wes Anderson provides to us in this beautiful concoction, wonderful pastry, if you will, like a Mendel's pastry. And yet there's so much deep within the confines and the contours. Surface level is beautiful and intricate, and things that are beneath the surface also are as equally beautiful and as equally intricate, in my opinion. So this is, in a sense, a wonderful example of Wes Anderson's technique, and yet at the same time we understand that we are also seeing something that is incredibly well constructed and intricate and pushing the boundaries, not just of Wes Anderson's cinema, but also of this kind of modern day cinema, if you will. Of course, there's a lot mentioned of the fact that we are dealing with different time periods, flashbacks within flashbacks within flashbacks within flashbacks. And so there is a real, what David Wardwell might describe as being box within box-like structure. So there is an intricacy in terms of the narrative flow and the complexity that is on paper seemingly quite complex, but when we watch it and experience it, there is a beautiful sense of flow and ease of entry into this world, because Wes Anderson, I think, makes it so wonderfully easy to access. And so there is a lovely sense of complexity on the one hand, and yet at the same time, we as audience members and as viewers can feel the flow and can really go along with it and really feel like we can understand and keep up with what's going on. So I love that sense of creating things that are complex and yet making them beautifully accessible in this Wes Anderson type of way that he does, in a beautiful sense of the cinematically acceptable, let me put it that way. But what's also wonderful is the technical aspects of this. There are many different kinds of techniques that are employed in this film in terms of model work, in terms of setting design and decor, in terms of real world settings that are used to create these fantasy worlds, these world building aspects within the film itself. There are also aspects of the costumes and the performances as well, but there are also puppetry, there's puppets, puppet work, there's miniature work, there's also certain clever tricks in terms of framing and setups. There's also use of aspect ratio, the size of the frame, the size of the film that's being used, and the square nature of it, or the elongated nature of it, or the tall nature of it, depending on the time period. And so there are many different technical feats that are being accomplished here within this single film, and the scope of the cinematic depth, if you will, or the reach of the cinematic depth of this film, both in terms of the emotional and also the technical, is really quite extraordinary. It is really an extraordinary example of cinema done right. And what a delightful film. Not only is it a technical marvel, which it is on many levels, but it is also such a satisfying, warm, funny, frightening film that seems to be a mixture of many different genres. It is a comedy film. It is one of those, it harkens back to those classical Hollywood films that deal with hotels as their settings. It also has flares and senses and curiosities that we come to know from certain aspects of animated films or European films. There's a certain sense of the theatrical. There's a certain sense of the action, suspense, chase, escapade sorts of films. There's also a real human drama here that at its core resonates so beautifully and so remarkably that I think it never loses sight of the fact that it is telling a very tender human story with really remarkably memorable human characters at its heart. So this is a mixture of many things brought together with brilliant panache, with the artistry of Wes Anderson's cinema. So this is, in essence, the Grand Budapest Hotel, and what a brilliant film to have in the Criterion Collection. And the Criterion Collection does not disappoint in terms of this release. So first we have a Blu-ray presentation. This is the Blu-ray of the 2K digital restoration, and this is according to the back, supervised by director Wes Anderson himself. So it's wonderful to see. It's a lovely image, really beautiful, rich, sharp, and quite striking. But that's not all, because this Blu-ray, this is the Blu-ray that I have, has a lot of stuff. Well, let me get to these features that are included with the film itself. So first we have a commentary track. Now this commentary track is indicated as being from 2020, and so that is very recent, and so that's remarkable. And this commentary track is a group commentary track that features Wes Anderson, Roman Coppola, Jeff Goldblum, and Kent Jones. And Kent Jones is very good. He provides a lot of detail about certain films that might be referenced in this particular film. Wes Anderson, of course, gives his commentary about certain details of the production and being in this town of Görlitz, which is on the German-Polish border, and so they were given. He provides a lot of insights and interesting anecdotes about being there during the production and how this film and the hotel, which is a very key integral part of the film, the setting and the interiors that were used were found in this place of Görlitz, and so there are some great stories that are recounted. There's also Roman Coppola as well, who is part of the crew, who's part of Wes Anderson's group, if you will. And he, of course, provides great insights along the way in terms of production stories and things of that nature. He also provides interesting anecdotes about other filmmakers like Philip Kaufman, and some of the commentary goes into interesting discussions about the works of Philip Kaufman. And there's an interesting anecdote that Roman Coppola gives about his mother, I think, and there was a zucchini that was growing in their family garden, and how they wanted to gift it to Philip Kaufman because it looked like something similar to the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And so that's an interesting anecdote. But that's an example, I think, of how wonderfully intimate this commentary can go. So it can go into very technical details about production history and anecdotes about the setting, what the production had to deal with, etc. But it can also turn into some really nice, delightful film-related conversations, and that's one example. And there is also there's Kent Jones, who also provides nice direction in terms of providing questions for Wes Anderson and the rest of the people on the commentary, maybe giving us some context into certain scenes, and he describes how certain scenes are homages to past cinematic films. Hitchcock comes to mind, Torn Curtain comes to mind, and the like. And so there's also discussion of other works like White Dawn, etc. So that's really wonderful to hear. And then there's Jeff Goldblum, who, as you know, appears in one of the key roles of this film. What a great performance he gives, and he has such a charm and wit and a lovely, almost otherworldliness about him in whatever interview he gives, but also in this commentary that is just delightful to hear. He has certain words that he uses which I really love. He talks about the use of the word ostensibly, and how it affected one particular scene that he's in with this film, and his discussions with Wes Anderson about that, which is great. He uses also the phrase fine-tooth combedly, which I've always loved. He also talks about little anecdotes that he has. He talks about an anecdote with Shelley Winters. He talks a little bit about Robert Altman, and he talks about Stanley Kubrick. And there's a certain scene in the film that is very reminiscent of Barry Lyndon. And so he gives these wonderful film connections, which I think is a film fan's dream. This commentary is a real film fan's dream. Not only are you listening to these great people talking about this wonderful film in a lovely, intimate way that has great camaraderie, but also they make all these references to all these different film people and personas and films themselves. So it's wonderful to try to keep up with their fast knowledge, and it's wonderful. There's also a great conversation about Harvey Keitel as well, who makes an appearance here as well, and talking about working with Harvey Keitel and his dedication to the craft, etc. And other references made as well to the Red Shoes. There's a character there called Lermontov in the Red Shoes, and how that played into the look and design of a particular character in this film, etc. There's also mentioning of De Palma, Brian De Palma. There's Bergman. The Silence in particular is mentioned, the film by Bergman, and the like. And so, and on and on and on. It filled with a lot of depth, humor, and warmth, just like the film itself. So that is the commentary track, a very recent one. There's also some mentions of the recent film, the film that they're doing, what they say now, which I understand is called The French Dispatch. And so not too many mentions of that, but just it's interesting to note that it is a very, very recent commentary, to the point that they are making some references to the most recent work by Wes Anderson. So that is highly, highly recommended, this commentary track. But that is not all, my friends, because we have a bunch of supplements here. What's the word? A plethora, if you will, of supplements. So the first is a section of the supplements section, which is called Visiting the Grand Budapest Hotel. And when you click on that, it takes you to a sub-menu, and it gives you a number of sub-categorized supplements, 3 in fact. The first is called Design and Special Effects, and the specific title is called Special Effects and Design of the Grand Budapest Hotel with Jeremy Dawson and Adam Stockhausen. And this is about 25 minutes. And this is talking about certain technical aspects of the film in terms of the design, miniature work, how the sets were developed, where they were developed, what the concerns and issues were in terms of the various time periods that were being depicted in the film, and use of aspect ratios and how that was affecting their work, etc. So there's the design aspect of it. There's also the special effects aspect of it in terms of how how certain miniatures were integrated into the film, how certain special effects shots were achieved. There's one sequence involving a chase, and so there are certain special effects tricks that were employed. So there are a great number of discussions about certain aspects of the film along those lines that I think is really quite fascinating. There's great emphasis also on the fact that this is a film that is almost a composite of many different techniques that can be described as being homemade on the one hand, or the up-to-date computer graphic effects on the other. And it's not necessarily the fact that Wes Anderson, as an artist, wanted to rely solely on the homemade aspect of the film, of the filmmaking process, but rather he had an idea, he had a vision, and whatever means it took to achieve that vision, that was what he wanted. And so that could have meant using homemade tricks and techniques, or it could have meant using computer graphic effects, or sometimes a combination of the two. And I find that to be a wonderful statement of the cinematic philosophy of Wes Anderson and his crew. Wonderful. In particular, check out the story or the description of the design of the box for the Mendel's pastries. That is a fascinating story, and just the amount of detail and care just going into the design of the box itself is an example of how detailed and intricate this work is. And so this is an example of why that is. So this is a great a great supplement to have. So the design and special effects supplement. Then we go into a supplement which is called music. And this is about 5 minutes. And we start with a brief interview with Randall Poster, who is a music supervisor. And then he's talking about the assembly of the balalaika orchestra that was used for the basis of the musical score. And then this goes into about a 5-minute little supplement of the recording session. And Wes Anderson is in the recording booth. He's also in the recording area itself, interacting with the musicians, etc., giving his direction. And we see the music play out during this recording session. A lovingly put together, intricate, detailed, so charming musical score. So this is the little short 5-minute piece on the music. And then there is a short 2-minute piece with respect to miniatures. And this is a sort of a slideshow presentation of pictures, but some moving images that is played along with music. And so we see some examples of the miniatures that were used, the miniature effects that were used, etc. So this is a nice example of the intricate work that was described in the earlier supplement. So that is a 2-minute feature on the miniatures. And then we have a documentary called Making of the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is 21 minutes. And this is great because this is a behind-the-scenes type of documentary. The camera is serving almost like a kind of fly on the wall as the filmmaking process progresses. And so we see Wes Anderson on location in this interior of a department store that was in the town of Görlitz, which was then fitted to become the interior of the hotel, Grand Budapest Hotel, which again is a very key integral part of this film. And so we see in this documentary Wes Anderson or other members of the crew working through certain aspects of the filmmaking process, costumes or certain filmmaking angles and preparation of scenes, etc. We get the occasional discussion with an actor who might be on set, maybe on standby, just about ready to go. So F. Murray Abraham gives a few great comments as well. Tony Revolori gives a number of great comments as well. And we also see the set or the location as it's being retrofitted in terms of the specific time periods that are being portrayed in this film, because as you know there are many different time periods being portrayed. And this is therefore a fascinating, illuminating look into the process and the work ethic of Wes Anderson and his crew. Just a number of things that are really interesting. We see a number of key members of cast and crew featured, as I say, in this behind-the-scenes type of approach. We also see Wes Anderson at work. Maybe he's sitting down, working with the actors, or working to try and get the right angle or the right shot for the particular take that they're planning, we see him talking with certain members of the cast and crew. There's always a beautiful sense of positive energy. There's a really wonderful sense of creativity that is just blossoming. I can feel it when I see this, just the type of high level of creative energy that must have been existent on that particular set or shooting. It's really wonderful. It's all revolving around Wes Anderson, what it is he's doing. We see also certain things about his filmmaking process. He seems to be very interactive. He seems to be wanting to have his, he wants to experience things about the props whenever possible. We see him at work. We see him riding a bicycle with some boxes on his shoulder, for example. We see him cutting a particular pastry, because there's a particular shot in the film that involves a character cutting a pastry, and we understand that it is his hands that are doing the cutting, which is a very fascinating thing as well. Goes to show the real efforts that he goes to in order to try to achieve his vision. And yet at the same time you can tell that there is such a great positive energy that is being generated whenever he is around. So and I think that's also evident by the fact that we see him and his films, and we see a number of the actors appear in many of his films. A number of the key members of his crew stay with him throughout his filmography. And so I think that is in many ways indicative of the fact that he really brings a lot of positive creative energy to his projects, and I think this is one of those examples. So we see this on display in this great documentary. So again, it's a 21-minute behind-the-scenes footage documentary on the making of the film. And then we have a third section of the supplements, which is called Storyboard Animatics. And this is 6 scenes that are shown in this storyboard animatic fashion. And what this essentially refers to is a moving animated storyboard. So as some of you may know, Wes Anderson prepared this particular work in terms of storyboard animatics in order to give a nice visual expression in terms of the pre-production planning process. So these are like storyboards, except they are moving, almost animated storyboards, so we can see them, and as they are going along, we hear the dialogue or the narration, which is voiced by Wes Anderson himself, I understand it. So this is a fascinating look at the pre-production process. As I say, there are 6 sequences here, and I would mention what they are in terms of the titles, because you have the option of playing them all at once, or you have the option of selecting one of the 6 in kind of chapter form. I would say what the titles are, except one of them reveals actually a specific aspect of the plot, and so I don't necessarily want to read them off lest I spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the film yet. And so just note that there are 6 storyboard animatic sections here, so you can click on that and watch the sequence in this animated storyboard fashion and see how it compares to the final product, which is very interesting. I would suggest that if you haven't seen the film yet, just wait until you've seen the film before you check out the animatics, because there are some titling of one in particular that's titled in a way that really gives a particular plot point away. But just note the black and white nature of it, except there's a specific area that's where color is used, which I think is very interesting. But anyway, that is a really fascinating look in the pre-production process of this film. Again, the storyboard animatics section. But that's not all, because then we have a 4th supplement section, which is entitled Video Essays. We have 2 video essays. First is by David Bordwell. This is from this is a Criterion Collection produced video essay, as far as I understand it, and this is called Wes Anderson Takes the 4-to-3 Challenge. And this is David Bordwell essentially talking to the camera, talking to us one-on-one, and accompanying his words, we have clips from the film edited together in a great way. We have certain examples of the filmmaking craft that David Bordwell is referring to as he's making his points about Wes Anderson, his cinematic art, and the way that his cinematic art was challenged and was put to the test in a brilliant way in this film. So this is, I think, essential viewing. David Bordwell is a giant in the film studies field, and to hear his comments here, I think, are just a really useful thing, an incredibly useful thing, because he talks about Wes Anderson's filmmaking style both in visual terms and also narrative terms. I referred to earlier this phrase boxes within boxes, or boxes in boxes, and this is taken from David Bordwell's description in this video essay. The idea that we have this intricate, what he refers to as the Russian doll type of narrative construction in terms of time period within time period within time period within time, or flashback within flashback within flashback. But not just that, this box type of structure is also very evident in the different uses of aspect ratio, the size of the frame, and how that plays into the themes of the film and the expressions of character in the film as well. And also he talks about the use of framing and the Wes Anderson techniques of framing, how in this film they are similar to what we've seen in previous Wes Anderson films, but also how this film, and in particular the aspect ratios, how they challenged Wes Anderson to do new and bold things with this Wes Anderson look at the frame and the way that he presents information within the frame, and the way that he centers or frames characters within the frame, and how they are edited and how they interact with each other, and then at the same time how this creates a world that seems wonderfully constructed, has an element of a beautiful comic absurdity, but also gives us a sense of the tragic and the melancholy. So this is a wonderful thing. I would also add that there's also a beautiful sense of a kind of expressionist cinema that is handmade, but that also is doing a lot of things on the screen that seem to be in many ways expressions of the characters and their particular feelings at the particular moments in time. And so I think that this is all a wonderful examination by David Wardwell in terms of the cinematic craft of Wes Anderson. Again, highly, highly recommended. And he also talks about what he calls planimetric stages or staging. Planimetric, which essentially is referring to what I've just described, which is the framing by Wes Anderson and how it has a kind of flat look on the one hand, and yet it's very intricate and there's depth to it on the other hand. And David Wardwell makes the case, I think, very convincingly about how this film challenges, it's both an exemplar of this kind of planimetric framing, but also is a challenge to the current use of the planimetric or the Wes Anderson look in a way that feels very novel and fresh in the context of his filmography. So this is a brilliant, brilliant essay with a lot of insights, and there's a great visual illustration as to the different aspect ratios and how that plays into certain themes and moods of the film as well. So a wonderful, and I love. There's references to how Wes Anderson's cinema seems to be using its characters in a way that is emotionally resonant on the one hand, but also feels like a story. It has a storybook, almost childlike aspect to its visual quality, and the people in the film feel like toys or some kind of, in a positive way, of course, like toys or something of a storybook fantasy. So again, a brilliant video essay from David Wardwell. But that's the first of two. The second being called Grand Budapest Hotel by Matt Zoller Seitz, who's also very, very famous, and his insights and his essays are really great. And this is one of them. This is about 16 minutes. This is, I understand it, not a Criterion-produced essay, but it was still recently produced. And this is going into aspects of the themes themselves, how this is a comedy on the one hand, but it's also a almost sad, melancholy film on the other. And this is going into a kind of thesis, if you will, of Matt Zoller Seitz, which is the idea of the film capturing sadness in its characters, and yet at the same time, contemporaneously, dealing with a fantasy world that is light and frothy and filled with energy and a sort of cinematic style. And it's interesting to hear his comments about how the film deals with aspects of tragedy in its characters, and versus how the film deals with sort of exuberant, lively excitement that can be described as being maybe cinematic, fantasy-based. And I think that's also a very positive thing. He also talks about Stefan Zweig, and as you know, the writings of Stefan Zweig are credited as being an inspiration for this film. I want to get that right. Inspired by the writings of Stefan Zweig. And so this is, I think, a very interesting aspect as well, the idea of the film capturing the essence, if you will, of Zweig in the characterizations and also in the story and the story beats and the story tones. In particular, the look as well, the look and feel of a sort of a period of time that is no longer in existence, and also the look of certain characters, the older author and the younger author, and then Gustav himself, the Ralph Fiennes character. They seem to have a look that resembles Zweig, and so this is a kind of echoing, if you will, further visual echoing of the spirit, if you will, of his writings that also deals with this idea of national identity and what he calls a youthful idealism, which I think is a really wonderful phrase. So this is another great visual essay, and one that I think is really worth it. And I love it too because he also does something very interesting. The earlier David Bordwell essay did this very well as well, but this visual essay, the Matzahler's Heights essay, also makes great links with past Wes Anderson works. And so he's talking about this film, Grand Budapest Hotel, on its own merit, and then he takes a step back and makes broader statements about Wes Anderson's cinema writ large. So a brilliant visual essay that deals with the commonalities of Wes Anderson's filmography, but then goes into specifics of the thematic concerns, if you will, that are at play in this film, Grand Budapest Hotel. Again, really worth it, about 16 minutes, but check it out if you can. But that's not all, because there is another section, a fifth section of the supplement, which is labeled Featurettes. And then when you click on that, you see a number of short featurettes, about 3 or 4 minutes each. So the first 4 are labeled parts 1 through 4. So part 1, the story. Part 2, the Society of the Crossed Keys. Part 3, creating the hotel. And part 4, creating a world. So these first 4 little short featurettes, about 4 minutes each, are I understand it, they were made around the time of the film, so 2014. They all have the end coming soon, so I'm assuming this is part of the marketing or maybe promo material for the film. And the first one is a story, so it's a brief description of the story. Some key members of the cast and crew are mentioned, are featured, and they're talking a little bit about what the story is about. Wes Anderson is also there. I love how Edward Norton appears as well, and he's the only one who whenever he mentions the title or the name of the hotel, he's very insistent on calling it the Grand Budapest. So I find that to be very interesting. But then the second part is called the Society of the Crossed Keys, and this is dealing with a particular aspect of the film's plot that is, I think, it doesn't appear for very long, but it's very memorable, and it actually goes into the heart of the world, if you will, of the hotel, and the importance of the hotel in a very key narrative aspect. So that's very great. And then part 3 is it's in that part 2. I should also mention Bill Murray, who features in this film as well. It's interesting to hear him talk about, I think he's talking about Marmite in one part of this part 2 featurette. So check that out if you're interested. And then part 3, it's called Creating the Hotel, and this is going into the specifics about creating the look of the hotel, where the location was, etc. And then part 4 is furthering that, except it's talking about the environment, the world at large, called Creating a World. Again, these are all great short promo type featurettes. But then that's not all, because we get more of these similar types of promo featurettes. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. First being titled Wes Anderson, which is about 3 minutes. This is a short featurette which we have people talking about, describing Wes Anderson, working with him and his types of filmmaking. Very loving comments made towards the filmmaker. And then the next promo is called The Cast, another 3-minute one, which is talking about the large assembly of great actors that are appearing in one film, and the various actors and how they're reacting to being in a film with other actors, and the kind of group dynamic that was created. So that's another great one. Next is Bill Murray tours Görlitz, and this is the town, as I say, where the film, the interior was shot, the main lobby of the hotel, and everything, all the shooting was centralized around this particular location. And so this is essentially Bill Murray walking through maybe the hotel or walking through parts of the town and just talking. We see him buying some sausage at one point. So this is really nice. Again, he does what he does really greatly. And so it's nice to see Bill Murray in action, as it were. And then there is a short 2-minute section called Kunstmuseum Zubrovka Lecture. And this is a short little in the world lecture that is given by the elder or the older writer, who is who's played by Tom Wilkinson, and he's giving a lecture and in character. And this is almost kind of another sort of promo to promote the film and to promote additional to promote the film and also to promote Stefan Zweig, if you will, because I think also the writings of Stefan Zweig were part of the promotional materials, or that was also something that was being promoted at the time. So the Society of the Cross Keys, that was the name of the book, I think, that was being promoted at the time. So this is part of that as well. It's nice to see Tom Wilkinson in character as the older author, by the way. And then the next part is called the Society of the Cross Keys, which is about 2 minutes. This is also an interesting in-world look. This is talking about this particular part of the plot called the Society of the Cross Keys, and it's giving these little factoids about the society and its history and certain world events and things of that nature. So this is also a bit of promotional material that is helping to world build, if you will. So that's also great. And then the last of these featurettes is called Courtesans au Chocolat. And this is an interesting 3-minute short which is showing us how to make the Mendel's pastries. So the pastries feature quite prominently in the film Grand Budapest Hotel. And so here we have a visual recreation, and it gives you a recipe. So you can go along and you can make the pastry with the recipe and the ingredients that are given. So it gives you how to make the pastry, how to make the filling, how to do the decorations, and then how to put the thing together, because it's a multi-part process, this kind of leveled pastry. And so I haven't tried it. I'm not much of a chef in the kitchen, but for any of you who are interested, please check out this supplement and try to make one of those pastries. They look really delicious, by the way. And then to round out the supplements on this disc, we have the trailer, which is about 2 minutes. Again, a really great trailer. But that is not all, because with this Criterion release, we have this, which is the Blu-ray, and the back. Now, the back has this glued on paper, because this is a digipack, and so it's glued on. I still keep this on because it has information about the film and information about the certain technical aspects of it as well. But this is a digipack that I have, and this is great because it opens up like this to reveal the inside, and the inside is one of these great digipacks that continues on with this lovely motif of the Grand Budapest Hotel in blue on the one hand and then pink on the other, which I think is a lovely touch. And then I've taken out the booklets here, what's described by Criterion as being the booklet, and some posters, and then some other ephemera. So let's look here. This is the booklet that's included, and you have certain aspects on the front and back which I think are thematically relevant to the film. Boy with Apple and a menu. So great stuff. And then inside we have more pictures and a lovely display of stills and background information, which is really wonderful. And then we have what's included here, among many things. We have a chapter list, and we have cast and credits, and then we have information about the transfer as well. And then we have 2 writings. First is one by Richard Brody, which is called Wes Anderson's Artistic Manifesto, Stefan Zweig, and A Longing for the Past. And this is the essay which was appeared in the New Yorker in 2014. And so this is it's described as being excerpted from 2 pieces published in March of 2014 in the New Yorker. So this is great because it has a description of the nostalgia element of this film, but also and how that's linked into Zweig himself, but also how that figures into Wes Anderson's filmmaking philosophy. So I think this is, again, very, very interesting. But that's not all, because we also get there's this work by Mark Twain, published in 1880, called A Tramp Abroad, and part of that was this thing called the appendix. The appendix to that Appendix A, but here it's described as being appendix to the semi-fictional A Tramp Abroad, which is called The Portier. And so this is that appendix by Mark Twain called The Portier. And this is an interesting inclusion because it's not necessarily, well, let me just put it this way. Reading this, one gets into the rhythms and cadences, if you will, of a kind of bygone era that is focusing in on this idea of the hotel and the life of a hotel and the life of the people and the personages that occupy that hotel. And so it is giving us a sense of the atmosphere and the environment and the feeling, if you will, that is, I think, exemplified very well in the film itself. So it's a nice one. It's a wonderful, has a soulful connection, if you will, with the proceedings, and so I like its inclusion here very much. But that is the booklet in essence. But that's not all we get, because we also get this, which is a poster. It's not the film poster per se, but it's a sort of fold-out poster art of the depictions or the art that's used for the Criterion artwork. So there's that blue motifed art that adorns the front cover, and then the pink artwork that adorns the inner part of the digipack, which I showed you here, like so. So again, we have that in this sort of fold-out poster form, which is brilliant. And then we get this, which is described, I think, as being ephemera from the film, which is essentially a fold-out which shows pictures or facsimiles of certain props or images that are essential details of the film as we see it. So, and it's put in this romantic poetry little leaflet that's supposed to represent another prop, or very significant one in the film itself. So this is wonderful as well, because we see a number of pictures and a number of the newspaper articles or excerpts from them, and we can read them and we can see what it is they say, because they flash across the screen for many of these examples in a moment, and then they're gone. I suppose we can, of course, freeze frame it and pause it to see what they are, but it's nice to see this, which is again a selection of the many aspects of the details that create this entire world of Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel, with a little logo here that is very significant as well for reasons that I've mentioned earlier. So this is the ephemera, which is a nice little bit of extra information. Again, this film is all about world building, and to have this is a reminder, a beautiful, lovingly prepared reminder of how important the world building aspect of this film is. So there is that. And so, my friends, this is, in a nutshell, the Criterion release of the Grand Budapest Hotel. And I can safely say that this will likely be a release that will be mentioned in later videos or later reviews, maybe at the end of the year, as being among the best, because this year is already shaping up to be a brilliant year from Criterion. But this release in particular is a standout in many respects. It's a standout release from Criterion of a standout film, a very popular one, for good reason, because it is an excellent, excellent Wes Anderson film. And so I am so happy that Criterion released it, but also I'm very happy that they released it in the way that they did, because what they have done is really quite memorable and brilliant, and a wonderful collector's item, but also a wonderful example of what Criterion does best, and also a wonderful example of the furthering relationship between Criterion and Wes Anderson, which I hope will continue for as many films as possible. So this is the Grand Budapest Hotel, once again, spine number 1025. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Please continue to stay safe, stay strong, and cheers.